بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, in our look at the calls to the believers in the Qur'an, Alhamdulillah, we've reached the 19th call that we're looking at. And this is both an important and sensitive call. It's an important call because it highlights the principled nature of our religion. Because the foundation of our religion is on two matters. The foundation of the guidance of our religion is based on two matters. The first is justice and the second is mercy. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Allah calls to justice and to excellence. And these are the two governing principles of our religion. And excellence is an expression of mercy because it's an expression of seeking to do things in the better way. And the verses that we're looking at are from Surah An-Nisa, verse 94. Surah An-Nisa, verse 94. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, إذا ضربتم في سبيل الله فتبينوا. When you go forth in the path of Allah, then confirm, right? Then confirm, be careful. And that's a governing principle, right? That's a governing principle with respect to jihad, right? That when you go, إِذَا ضَرَبْتُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, when you go forth in Allah's way, then be careful. فَتَبَيَّنُوا. وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ أَلْقَى إِلَيْكُمُ السَّلَامَ لَسْتَ مُؤْمِنًا. And do not say to someone who offers you the greeting of peace, the salam, that you're not a believer. تَبْتَغُونَ عَرَضَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Seeking thereby some fleeting chance gain of this life. فَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ مَغَانِمُ كَثِيرًا. For with Allah, there are plentiful gains, or Allah has plentiful gains for you. كَذَلِكَ كُنْتُم مِّن قَبْلُ. You yourself were in the same position before. فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ. And Allah was gracious to you. فَتَبَيَّنُوا. So be careful. And so it's a reiteration of that need for being careful. And we look at what that is referring to. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. Truly, Allah is fully aware of all that you do. Truly, Allah is fully aware of all that you do. This verse has a specific context. This verse was revealed regarding Mirdas ibn Nahik from the people of Fadak. And Mirdas had become Muslim, but his people had not become Muslim. So Mirdas himself had entered Islam, but his people hadn't entered Islam yet. And our beloved messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, had sent an expedition, a Sariyah, to the people of Fadak. And the military expeditions that took place during the Prophet's time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were of two types. There are those that are called a ghazwa, and a ghazwa is one in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself participated. And you have a Sariya, and the Ghazwa, they tend to be bigger ones. So typically they're translated as the battles. And the Sariya is an expedition that the Prophet ﷺ sent forth. And the head of this expedition was Ghalib ibn Fudala al-Laythi. When this expedition reached the people of Fadak, they fled. Right? Because the Muslims were resolute, and they had a reputation that they don't muck about. So these people got scared, they didn't oppose them or resist, they just fled. But Mirdas remained out of confidence with his Islam. I'm a Muslim, what do I have to fear? So when the Muslim army reached Fadak, and there's no one around, so they gave the takbir. And Mirdas gave the takbir. And he was on the top of a mountain or a hill. And his flock of sheep was with him. So he came to them. And he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum. But the Muslims thought that the people of Fadak, they're all disbelievers and they're in opposition to the Muslims, etc. So Usama ibn Zayd, thinking that this is one of the enemies, he killed Mirdas. And who's Usama ibn Zayd? Usama ibn Zayd is the son of Zayd ibn al-Haritha, who was the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ when outright adoption was still permitted. He used to be referred to as Zayd ibn Muhammad, but then Allah SWT said, call them by their fathers' names. So he was then referred to as Zayd ibn al-Haritha. But he grew up with the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of the companions who was very close to the beloved Messenger ﷺ. So Usama ibn Zayd is known as Al-Hib ibn al-Hib, the dearly beloved, the son of the dearly beloved. But he thought, this is an enemy. He's just come to us to, it might be treachery, it might be this, it might be that. So he killed him. Even though he came down, and he also, from the top of the hill, he said, Allahu Akbar. He came down and said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum. And he thought that the herd of cattle that he had, that Mirdas had, rahimahullah, that this is war spoils. It's ghanima. Ghanima, ghunm is profit, is gain. Ghanima it refers to gains, profits in general, but particularly war spoils. What you gain out of war. So he took them back to Medina, and there was a large flock of cattle. The Sahaba, the people who went on the expedition, those companions, they were confused. Was this right? Was this not right? So they went to Rasulullah ﷺ and informed them that this is what happened. And the Prophet ﷺ was deeply shaken by this. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, قتلتموه إرادة ما معه وهو يقول لا إله إلا الله. Said you killed him because of seeking what he had while he was saying La ilaha illallah. So Sayyidina Usama bin Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, إنه قال بلسانه دون قلبه. He said he said it with his tongue, not with his heart. And in another narration he also added, he only said it out of the fear of the sword. He didn't want to be killed, so he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم هلا شققت عن قلبه فنظرت أصادق huwa am kadhib, says, did you open up his heart and see whether he was truthful or lying? And then this verse was revealed. Right? That, O you who believe, when you go forth in the path of Allah, then be careful. فَتَبَيَّنُوا, be careful. Right? تَبَيَّنُوا means be careful, make sure, be clear. So that what you're doing is correct, is right, is principled, is just, is restrained. And that's a general principle in jihad. A specific example, what happened with Mirdas. And do not say to someone who offers you the greeting of peace, you're not a believer. So this is in general, but the specific context is the case of Mirdas. So Usama bin Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, Ya Rasulullah, istaghfir li. Said, seek Allah's forgiveness for me. Because Sayyidina Usama thought, okay, this is a state of war. Okay? It was a state of war. So they went to face the enemy, they fled. One person from them remains, you don't know, maybe it's treachery. Maybe they just position one guy with his sheep and they're going to counterattack. Maybe he's just faking it. The Muslims were in need. All that flock, that could feed a lot of people. So of course you see the issue of unconscious ulterior motives. Unconscious ulterior motives. That sometimes you think you're doing the right thing, but secondary considerations that are actually worldly creep into it. Right? They creep into it. So what's the purpose of the verse? The purpose of the verse here, it highlights a number of important things. The first is the gravity of taking human life. The basis of human life is, Yasmin, can you come here please? The basis of human life is that it is sacred. The basis of human life is that it is sacred. You cannot take human life based on your own whim, your own judgment, your own feelings, your own emotions, but rather that human life is sacred. But we also have the concept of just war. Of just war. And jihad is just war. Right? It is for the preservation of justice, for the maintenance and spread of mercy. Right? It is there to protect the good and to bring the good. It is not for self-gain. It is not for profiteering. It is not for a worldly motive. It is an exception to the sanctity of life, but it is done, it is engaged in only in accordance with the principles of the Lord, of the one who has given sanctity to all life. Right? So it tells us about the gravity of taking human life. That even in battle, right? The first, the broad principle, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, be very clearly careful. Right? Be very clearly careful. The second is the gravity of killing a Muslim. Even if all you know about them is that they've outwardly professed Islam. That is even more grave. So there's the gravity of human life in general. فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Be very careful. Whom you're fighting, how you're fighting, why you're fighting. Okay? But also, particularly the Muslim. Right? Someone who gives you the greeting of peace. Who would give you the greeting of peace? A Muslim. Right? And from this, the Hanafis took the principle from the Qur'anic verse that, and other verses, that another text of the Qur'an and the Sunnah, that is not a condition for the validity of someone's Islam, that they say La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Of course, people would dispute that, well, Mirdas did say it. But the verse says, if someone says, peace, assalamu alaikum to you, you assume that they're a Muslim. If that's what it would appear. Because in these greetings are devotional greetings. And these are devotional greetings. And people would only use their own devotional greetings. Assalamu alaikum is a believing Muslim's greeting. Someone who disbelieved would not say that. So, from that someone professes Islam or appears to profess Islam, then they have even a greater degree of sanctity. You also see, of course, that we judge by the outward, and we'll expand on that. That we judge by the outward, we do not judge people's motives. We do not judge by people's motives. And then the verse continues that don't say that they're not a Muslim. Right? If someone greets you, don't say they're not a Muslim. Out of desire, تَبْتَغُونَ عَرَضَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, out of desire for the chance gains of this life. فَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ مَغَانِمُ كَثِيرًا, for with Allah there is great gain. So, firstly, there's many questions that arise from this. One is sincerity. Sincerity. That sincerity is a general principle in life. Anything you do, you should do with sincerity. You do it seeking the pleasure of Allah. But particularly those actions that are only to be done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And jihad is one of those actions that is only allowed for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And jihad is not something to be done for merely worldly gain. Jihad is not something to be done for merely worldly gain. So that you are fighting on principle, and then you say, well, he has a lot of sheep. If he becomes Muslim, if we accept he's Muslim, if he comes with us, what if he's an informant? What if he's working for the enemy? What if this? What if that? No. Sincerity is you act solely for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking Allah and what is pleasing to Allah, and not any other ulterior motive. That is sincerity. And sometimes sincerity is tested in some of the things that we do of service. So you organize an event and people responded well to it. But you did the event with the intention of calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But people responded really well to the entertainment. So what do? So they gave a lot of donations. So you start doing comedy sessions because people like the entertainment, so it'll raise money. But now, what's the intention? The intention had been da'wah. Okay? So sometimes there's secondary gains which are recognized, but you have to check the intention with those matters. So here, this man comes, he says, I'm Muslim, but he has a big flock of sheep, as Mirdas rahimahullah had. He said, well, and sometimes it clouds your primary judgment, right? Because you see the big flock of sheep, you say, he couldn't be Muslim, you kill him. You thought you're making an honest judgment, but your primary judgment, is he Muslim or not, is clouded by these secondary considerations. Well, he has a big flock of sheep, he's probably not Muslim. Why? Because unwittingly, because if he's not Muslim, and in battle, and it was a state of war, his flock then becomes war spoils. I say, well, it's not for my personal gain, it is for our collective gain. No, but even collective gain is judged on what? On principle. This is not correct. Right? So even, especially, it's not just even in war we are principled. Especially in war, we are principled. Right? And of course, we know from the state of Sayyidina Usama bin Zayd and his uprightness and his remorse thereafter, that he thought he was judging by whether this person is truly a Muslim or not. Whether he's truly a Muslim or not. Right? But there's a warning that sometimes your sincerity in judgment can be clouded by secondary considerations unwittingly. Sometimes we leave sincerity because of secondary considerations, but sometimes those secondary considerations cloud one's judgment. They say, how do you preserve that sincerity of judgment, that you're really judging on the basis of what is pleasing to Allah? You have to consider carefully. You have to check your intention. Number two, you consult. You consult. The Prophet ﷺ said that التأني لا يأتي إلا بخير والعجلة من الشيطان. Circumspection brings only good. Circumspection, thinking things through, brings only good, while haste is from the devil. Right? You can be deceived. You thought you're making a good decision. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Allah has plenty of gains for you. In reality, what is reward? The reward of the actions that we do, where is it? Thawab. Where is thawab? What is thawab? Thawab is what Allah has promised and prepared for righteous, accepted action in the hereafter. Thawab is what Allah has promised and prepared for the believers of reward of gain in the hereafter. So reward is what Allah has promised and prepared of gain for believers in the hereafter. And the gain, it can be because the rewards of the hereafter are of different types. The reward of your actions is not in this life. And that's important to remember, because sometimes we do certain things and we don't see the immediate fruit of them, or we don't see the fruit of them. There's prophets. Allah's Messenger ﷺ tells us that he was shown the prophets gathered on the plain of resurrection, and there are some prophets. How many people are standing behind them? Nobody. They're sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one believed in them. There's others who only had a handful of people. Others who only had a small group of people. And we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how many of Sayyidina Nuh's people believed in him. Only a few, in relative terms. And he called them 950 years. Was he a failure? Of course not. He's a prophet of Allah. He did exactly what Allah commanded him. He said, I call them to you by day and by night. So where's the reward of our actions? In the hereafter. And that's part of ihtisab. And the nature of people is خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. People have been created hasty. They like the immediate and alluring. They don't think about what is of eternal gain to them. And so that's reward. Right? And the maghanim here, right, the spoils of war, ghanima is gain. So your judgment was clouded by the ghanima, by this gain. But with Allah is great gain. Maghanimu kathira. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the gain there as arad al-hayat al-dunya. And arad is a fleeting matter. Okay? Arad is a fleeting matter. Okay? Something that comes and goes. He doesn't even refer to it as ghanima, which is what they considered it spoils of war, but he refers to it as arad. Right? Something fleeting that comes and goes. But the ghanima, it's not just ghanima. Ghanima is the gain from war. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referred to فَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ مَغَانِمُ كَثِيرًا. With Allah is great gain. Maghanim in the plural. This is the expansive plural. Is great gain. Right? So that's the gain that the believer seeks. Right? And jihad, right? Jihad is not a political move. Right? Jihad is a sacred trust that has very careful limits. What's the basic principle of it? إِذَا ضَرَبْتُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. When you go forth in the path of Allah, then تَبَيَّنُوا. Be clear and careful. This is why they say one of the adab of jihad is that you cannot go forth in jihad until at least the commanders and those in position, in authority, know the ethics of the adab, the fiqh related to jihad. That what if this happens? What if that happens? What if there's prisoners of war? What if this happens? What if there's a siege? What can you do in a siege and what can't you do? When can you lay siege? When can you not lay siege? Both to know the law of it, the limits, and what is the ethics of it. What are the adab? There's adab because it's a devotional act. Right? So there's adab, there's right conduct. And you see this. Right? And we have a history of noble war. Right? And read the history of how, for example, Jerusalem was reconquered by Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. Right? The Crusaders had made blood flow in the streets of Jerusalem. Muslim blood and also Jewish blood, but particularly the Muslims. But Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, before he took over, he granted safe passage. They could go in whichever direction they wanted, and he assured them safe passage. And people were saying to him, but you know, what if as they're leaving the city, they take their arms, etc., and they gather, they send mess? Why? Because it is principle. It is principle. This is done out of adl and ihsan. It's done out of rahmah. Right? So it is, so jihad is not something that we should feel embarrassed about. If anything, jihad, properly understood, highlights the beauty, principle, and mercy embodied by the guidance that Allah Most High has given the Prophet ﷺ. His own battles. Like sometimes people say, well, you know, if you present the seerah, don't talk about the battles. Okay? It's embarrassing. No, it's not embarrassing. Firstly, why is it embarrassing? It happened. Like, it's not like they're saying, okay, come fight us. People attack the Prophet ﷺ, right? People attack. But then the response in those battles shows that this is a man who has nothing to do with whim, with desires, with worldly gain. Usama bin Zayd came with his huge flock of sheep. He didn't care about the flock of sheep. It was not about gain. He says, oh great, you guys won. It was about principle. So you killed one person wrongfully. The Prophet ﷺ was shaken. And in a battle, you go fight some people, people will die. But one person was wrongfully killed, and the Prophet ﷺ, وَجْدًا شَدِيدًا, he was deeply moved and troubled by that. One life. Right? And who was it? You could say, who is it anyways? Right? No. Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَذَلِكَ كُنْتُمْ مِنْ قَبْلِ. You yourself were in the same position once. Okay? And you yourself were in the same position once. Specifically, this is an address to the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. That there was a time when you were not Muslim and you entered Islam. And would you allow anyone to doubt your Islam? And if you didn't, if it's not you who entered Islam, then most of the Muslims in the world, they're not descended from the Sahaba, and even if they're descended from Sahaba, the Sahaba entered Islam, right? But most of them embrace Islam. So if you didn't enter Islam yourself, someone before did, right? And would you have people doubt, well, they're only Muslim for 2 generations, for 3 generations, for 5 generations? No. Although this is the tribal tendency. There's people, for example, who've been in certain Muslim countries. Like I have a friend, his family is originally from Balochistan. Originally meaning their family migrated to Mecca 450 years ago. But he'll still introduce himself, I'm Balochi. But he's a Saudi citizen. And why? Because they say, oh, they're not from us. They're from over there. That's the human tendency. So you yourself were in the same position once. You were not Muslim. فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ, and God was gracious to you. Right? God bestowed His grace upon you. Man is a grace, a favor, a blessing. Right? But God was gracious to you. Gracious with what? He guided you to Islam. He guided you to Islam. He granted you Iman. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reiterates, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, so be careful. Right? Be careful. Right? So the specific reference here is to the Sahaba. Right? That when you go forth in jihad, realize that the people you're fighting, they may be disbelievers, but you were disbelievers before. The only difference is Allah has blessed you with faith. So someone comes and says, I'm a believer, just as you wouldn't want anyone to doubt your claim to be a believer, don't doubt anyone else's claim to be a believer. None of you believes until they wish for others of the good that they wish for themselves. That applies even in battle. فَتَبَيَّنُوا, so be careful. Right? And this makes clear that we are not a religion, ours is not a religion and a sacred law that in which ends justify means. That the end may be noble, but the means have to be noble as well. The ends must be sound, the means must be sound as well. Right? Why? Because it's done out of consciousness that it is from Allah. فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ, so Allah graced you with it. It is about Allah. Your whole, the whole transaction is not between you and the enemy. That is just the form of what's happening. The reality in battle is what? Where is your focus in battle? On Allah. Right? On Allah. You're doing it because this is what's just and right. Okay? And you're doing it in a manner that Allah has made clear that this is the just and right way of going about it. And why are you struggling and striving? Seeking His pleasure, not for ulterior motive. Okay? So be careful. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. Allah is truly aware of what you do. The ulama of tafsir also mention that this part of the verse also makes clear that one of the right responses to blessings is to be careful. Right? Someone gifts you something precious, one of the immediate responses is that you're careful about it. You open a precious present, and the nature of the blessing of faith is that it's a subtle, delicate blessing. You didn't deserve it. You didn't earn it. You didn't acquire it. Guidance is a pure gift. But it's a subtle gift. So you have to be careful with it. And what's the being careful with it? That is upholding taqwa. It's upholding taqwa. So this verse doesn't expressly, the tabayyanu, right, being careful, is one aspect of taqwa. Right? So this verse too, because most of the calls, as we've been seeing, are connected with taqwa. Right? So you could say the message of this verse is uphold what taqwa entails in jihad. Uphold what taqwa or mindfulness of Allah entails in jihad. How do you do that? Tabayyanu. Be clear and cautious and careful. Of course, you cannot do any of that unless you know, unless you have knowledge. Unless you have knowledge. So it requires knowledge and it requires awareness. Right? Awareness of Allah. Inna Allah kana bima ta'maluna khabirat. For truly Allah is well aware of all that you do. Okay? And He is well aware, and the word khabir, because ilm is to know things as they are. And of course, Allah's knowledge is encompassing. Right? So Allah's knowledge is absolute. But why are different names used to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge? Because they bring out different shades of meaning. Because Allah's knowledge is absolute. It's not that ilm is this part of Allah's knowledge and al-khabir is another type of knowledge. No, Allah's knowledge is absolute. Right? Allah knows all the necessary, the possible and the impossible. In every way, without ever not knowing it. If you just pause for a second, because we were talking about Allah's being fully aware. Allah knows all that is necessary, the wajib. What is necessary? That which must be and cannot not be. Allah knows everything about Himself. Right? All that is rationally necessary. And He knows all that is impossible. Impossible meaning absurd. That which is not and cannot be. He knows all of it. And that's mind-blowing. All the things that are absurd. Square circles and triangles that are not rectangles and all the things that are absurd, He knows all of that too. But then if you look at the realm of possibility, He does not simply know what is. He doesn't simply know what was. He doesn't simply know what will be. He knows all the possible. And not just the possible for that which was, is, and will be. Because even that's mind-blowing, right? If you just think of all that is, and all that is not just humans, the whole created universe. But for everything that exists, He knows all the possibilities for it. In terms of when, where, how, what, extent, quantity, qualities. And all, they actually, the ulama said, there's 6 essential traits for anything. There's 6 types of possibilities for anything. They call them al-mumkinat al-mutaqabilat. Right? The different possibilities for that which is possible. Just that is mind-blowing. The whole created universe, from the beginning of time till the end of time, He knows all that is possible for it. Not all that, how it was, is, and will be, but every possibility. If you just think of all the possibilities for you yourself, you could have existed at any time. You could have had in any place. You could have existed with any qualities, any attributes. That itself is like amazing. But that, not only to all that is, but to all that could have been and never came and was never willed. It's mind. If you just pause to think, if you think about the created universe, Allah knows all that and far, because that's just the created universe is just a tangible. It's just one part of the actual mulk, the tangible creation. Then there's the spiritual realms, the malakut and the higher realms, and the of the unseen, and Rabbul Alameen, the Lord of the worlds, and we don't know what those worlds are. It's mind blowing, and that's just what is, let alone what could have been with that, and beyond that, what was possible and was never willed to be. But ilm refers to knowing ma'rifatu shay kama hu, okay, is to know something as it is. Khabir, khibra, has a sense of complete awareness. Right? Someone says, I know about cars. But he said, Fulan khabir. Right? It has a sense, with respect to humans, it has a sense of experience. Khibra is experience. It's not just that you know appearances of things. That, okay, this is a car, this is the engine. But the one who is khabir knows things from all sides. Right? They can just look at the engine. They don't have to open it up. They can say, this is the problem. Did they ask why? It becomes almost intuitive. They don't even have to explain it. They say, well, because there's discoloration on this side, which means that this thing is wrong, and that's probably happened because of that over there. And they say, how can you tell? That's khibra. It's experience. It's complete awareness. So, but when it relates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's knowledge, knowing both the zahir and the khafi, knowing the manifest and the hidden of things. Right? So Imam Ghazali says that the khabir, the all-aware, الخبير هو الذي لا تعزب عنه الأخبار الباطنة ولا يجري في الملك والملكوت شيء ولا تتحرك ذرة ولا تسكن ولا تضطرب نفس ولا تطمئن إلا ويكون عنده خبر. He said, the all-aware is the one from whom nothing is hidden of hidden matters, nor does anything whatsoever happen in the tangible worlds, in the material worlds, the mulk, or in the spiritual worlds, the malakut, nor does any atom move or become still, nor a breath come forth, nor stop, except that he is fully aware of it. So it says, Khabir, he says, in essence, is the same as Al-Alim. Khabir is the same as Al-Alim. Right? Al-Alim, the one who's all-knowing. But when ilm, he says, لكن العلم إذا أضيف إلى الخفايا الباطنة سمي خبرة. He says, but knowledge, when it is affirmed with respect to the subtle and hidden things, you call it awareness. Khibra. And the one who knows the subtle and hidden things, you call him khabir, someone who's aware. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closes with this. Why? Because the call is, be very careful in jihad. فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Be clear, be careful, not only about what you do and how you do it, but be very clear about your motives. And they say that the ibaratun nas, the expression of the text, is referring to jihad. But its indication refers to everything that you do, both in matters of service, of khidmah, of public action, but also in your life, in those situations where you may have ulterior motives. What do you have to do? Because in jihad there can be worldly gain. There is worldly gains. Spoils of war, political gain. If you win, okay, if your tribe was leading that expedition, then someone from your tribe might get appointed as governor and all kinds of, but it's not about any of that. Which is why Allah subhanahu closes, Allah truly is fully aware of what you do. That be very careful about, in your actions, both about their outward correctness, but also the correctness of the intention within. The intention within. And the intention within and the incident, the specific incident, this is what the context of Revelation brings out. Sayyidina Osama, what was he doing, radiallahu ta'ala anhu? Did he do that? Did he do what he did of killing Mirdas? Did he do it for ulterior motives? No. But his judgment may have been affected by these considerations. By enmity, by not giving him the benefit of the doubt, by the spoils of war, and sometimes even that he was very proud of taking the sheep, the flock back to Medina, because the Prophet ﷺ used to be pained by the hunger of his companions. So you get this large flock of sheep. There's lots of advantage to it, but you're not doing it for these worldly advantages, even if it'll get you some gains. So one always has to check one's intention. You're giving a talk and you notice that someone you know is there. So you mention something in the talk, and you could mention something that, for example, Dr. Omar comes in the talk. So you mention something that I once heard from Dr. Omar, but you do it to complete the benefit. إكمالا للفائدة. That's good. But the criteria has to be what? Is this sincerely for Allah? Or are you doing it simply? Because you can have ulterior motive. Dr. Omar comes in, you mention Dr. Omar, it could be because you want to gain his favor. Because you'd like to invite him later to your center. So you want him, you're hoping that he'll soften up if you mention him. But is this for Allah? And you have to be careful with the nafs, because sometimes unconsciously you'll say things. You mention Dr. Omar, but you're not actually mentioning him. What are you implicitly mentioning? That I know Dr. Omar. Right? So you're actually indirectly pointing to yourself. Right? That's why the ulama would say, احذر ممن يكثر من قول شيخنا فلان. And that be careful of the one who says a lot, our Shaykh so and so, and our Shaykh so and so. Why? Because by pointing to these other people, indirectly what are you saying? Oh, I know Shaykh so and so, I know Shaykh so. Like indirectly you're trying to gain your own favor. I got a tough lesson with that once. One of the mashayikh from Damascus came to Amman, and they asked me to introduce him. And I really love the Shaykh. So I laid it on thick. And the Syrians are really good at buttering things up. I think more than most people. Like really, the art of, really buttering things up, the Syrians have it down pat. Although many other Muslim people are good. It's part of adab, but sometimes adab taken too far. So and he's Shaykh Hassan al-Hindi, remarkable scholar, blind, but hafiz of Qur'an. He'd remember, like sometimes there's a book we were reading, it had a lot of mistakes. He said, this same mistake happened before, didn't it? So yeah, well, like 20 pages ago? And I'd go back, it'd be exactly 20 pages. How do you know it's 20 pages? But, like really sharp. Afterwards at night, I was with him and he said, Shaykh Faraz, he said, ناوي تعمل لك دعاوي شيء? He said, you want to make some claims about yourself? I said, why? He said, no, Sayyidi. He said, be careful when you praise people. He said, because when you're praising me, were you really praising me? Or was your nafs trying to say that, look, أنا شيخ كبير. I'm something big. Because this sheikh is really big, so I'm not so small either. Okay? So I said, be very careful. So always check your intention before you say or do anything. And that's a benefit of keeping the company of people who themselves are careful about their sincerity. Right? So that Allah is all aware, so you should be all aware of the choices you make, your actions, your decisions. In general, particularly in jihad, because jihad there's worldly gains involved, political, economic, right? Of prestige, of honor. Right? You're the victor, this and that. But it also applies more broadly, that be very careful about your intent, because that's what your success in the hereafter depends on. Imam Ghazali has, in his work on the 99 names, with each of the names he mentions two things. Ta'alluq and takhalluq. How do you turn to Allah through the meanings of that name? And how do you characterize, that's ta'alluq, how do you attach yourself to Allah, how you connect with Allah through the implications of that name? And the other is takhalluq. How do you characterize yourself with the implications of that name of Allah as applies to you as a servant of Allah? So if Allah is Al-Khabir, how should you be as the servant of Al-Khabir, of the servant of the All-Aware? So he said, وحظ العبد من ذلك أن يكون خبيرا بما يجري في عالمه وعالمه بدنه وقلبه. Right? He says, the share of the servant being all aware, khabir, is that they should be all aware of what happens in their world. But Imam al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala, he says, وَعَلَمُهُ قَلْبُهُ وَبَدَنُهُ وَالْخَفَايَا التي يتصف القلب بها من الغش والخيانة والطواف حول العاجلة وإضمار الشر وإظهار الخير والبخل بإظهار الإخلاص والإفلاس عنه. He says that you should be, your share of this name is that you should be all aware of your world. But what is your world? He said your world is your heart and your body. But that, like, you as a human being are a subtle reality. What is the world that you inhabit? Your heart is the primary world you're in. Then your body. Then your surroundings and other things. But only a fool is worried about Gaza when their heart is more devastated than Gaza is. But it's not Israel that's bombing your heart. You yourself are throwing bombs on your own heart. And you're not worried about that. That's the immediate world you're living in. Right? You know, your nafs is a Zionist. Okay? Okay? Right? And your poor heart is oppressed. Right? So you should be, awareness begins from within. Because that's where do you exist? You don't live in this physical world. Your world begins with your heart, then your body, then your surroundings, then the wider world. And to be aware of the hidden matters that are characterized by the heart, that are dark and wrong, of cheating and deception, of circumambulating, making tawaf around the immediate, hiding evil and manifesting good, being miserly, manifesting sincerity while inwardly being bankrupt of sincerity of motive. And this awareness is only present in someone who has deep khibra, who has deep experience and awareness of these subtleties. So to gain that awareness, you need to connect with those who are aware of the subtleties of the heart, so they can help you heal the heart, so that you too can become khabir, right? So you too can become well aware. To what end? To the end of answering the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that when you go forth, whether it be in jihad, when that's called for, or you go forth in anything in life, you can do so on the basis of tabayyun, of clarity, on the basis of clarity. There's a number of lessons, of points of benefit that are understood also from this verse. The 94th verse of Surah An-Nisa. One is that Sayyidina Usama's actions establish the principle that al-mujtahid qad yukhti', right? that the person who makes ijtihad, who makes independent religious judgment, may err. Right? And Sayyidina Osama made his judgment on the basis of reasoned opinion. That really? Like, what would you assume about the people of Fadak? They're all non-Muslims. That's what they knew about them. That's why they all fled. It was war. When they heard the army, Muslim army coming, they fled. This one guy is left. Now, how would Mirdas be a Muslim? Right? Out there, like, right? So he thought he was judging by the outward. The outward would appear to be not, these are people at war with the Muslims. None of them were known to be Muslims. This guy is surrounded by the Muslim army, comes down and says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. What would you assume? Right? So it's an understandable judgment. That it's counterintuitive. You say, no, he's just saying it. You probably heard that that's how you become Muslim. Let's say it, save myself. Right? But that you judge by the outward, but on the basis of good opinion. Right? But the first lesson is that a mujtahid can make an error. Right? And of course, someone who is qualified to make that judgment, when they make an erroneous judgment sincerely, they're still rewarded for it. They're still rewarded for it. The Prophet ﷺ did not punish him. He corrected him, but he did not punish him. Because this was not on the basis of foolish judgment. It was not on the basis of unqualified judgment. He didn't make a fatwa when he couldn't give fatwa. Rather, this was based on, he was someone capable of making religious judgment, but he made a mistake. He was corrected, but he was not punished for it, even though it was taking off a life here. Because it was a reasoned judgment, it was an ijtihad. And that's different from acting on the basis of ignorance. And you see his confidence. Right? Of course, the side point is the Prophet ﷺ, he was not happy. He was upset. He was shaken by this incident. Yet still Sayyidina Osama was able to present his argument, which tells you about the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ. That one of the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ was that he had adl fil ghadabi wal rida. He was balanced both when upset and when happy. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He was very displeased with it. Sayyidina Osama still said, Ya Rasulullah, but he only said it to save himself. He only said it because of the weapon. And the Prophet said, shut up, I'm the messenger of God. No, he listened to him. And he responded back. He said, did you open his heart? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Also, you see from that we accept outward profession of Islam, even if context or motives may have otherwise given reason to question that. So some people surrender and say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. You accept that. Okay? And you still see examples of that. One of my teachers and friends in Damascus, Shaykh Ustaz Mahmoud al-Bayruti, who owns a prestigious publishing house as well, Maktabat al-Bayruti. He travels different times of the year to different parts of the world, collecting manuscripts, which he'd buy and sell. And one day he came back from Russia. I saw something really weird today, really weird in Russia, and he was there in Ramadan, and I was joking with him. Yeah, very convenient to travel during Ramadan, eh? He says, "Wallah, I pray Taraweeh." He says, but in Moscow there's this one Taraweeh, كان عجيب جدا. He says, it's really strange. I said, how would Taraweeh be really strange? He said, no, because firstly the guy leading it looked Russian. He didn't look like he was from one of the republics. So okay, what's the big deal with that? He says, no, But every 4 rak'ahs, his wife, and she says she's dressed very strangely. She was coming, she would serve people your snacks and drinks, which is kind of strange, especially if you're from Damascus, a very conservative society. Some Russian woman's coming and serving tea and biscuits and stuff every few rak'ahs. So afterwards he went and talked to the Imam, who are you, where are you from? I said the Imam looked strange, because he looked Russian, but he was reminding me of people from India. This is ajib. So anyways, what happened was, this man was part of the Soviet army that invaded Afghanistan. In those days, Mujahideen were heroes in the world. Right? So anyway, his group got ambushed by the Mujahideen, this Soviet soldiers group. And now when you're in the mountains of Afghanistan, what are you going to do with trained Soviet soldiers? You don't have prisons. If you capture them, take them somewhere, they're trained soldiers, you're not. So what they used to do is just kill them. It's war. Now how could you save yourself? If you're a Soviet soldier, how do you save yourself? You don't even speak the local language. Sorry for the explicitness of the example. According to this soldier, the only way you could save yourself was to drop your pants, if you were circumcised. Of course, most of the Soviet soldiers, apparently, I haven't done any research on it, were not circumcised. Because they thought, socialist, communist rule, they thought these are all superstitions, etc. The only people who would be circumcised would be the Muslims, because you can't stop Muslims from practicing Islam. Like, don't even try. Right? And some Orthodox Christians, but even them, they kind of, most of them let these practices go. This guy was not Muslim, but he's from a family of Orthodox priests. So he'd been secretly circumcised. So he dropped his pants and said Muslim. So they took him. Everyone else in his group were captured and presumably killed. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do with him. So they took him to a madrasa in northern Pakistan. That was his prison. So he'd get up before Fajr, make wudu in cold water, have to recite Qur'an till Fajr, pray Fajr, do the dhikr after Fajr, go to Qur'an during the day, classes, etc. So Ustaz Mahmoud, the Syrian scholar, asked him, so when did you become Muslim? He says, I don't know. One day I woke up and I believed in all these things I was doing. Right? But if someone outwardly says, I'm Muslim, you have to accept it. You have to accept it. And he could turn out to be someone like the Russian soldier. Right? Became a shaykh. He graduated from that madrasa. Became hafiz, graduated from that madrasa, returned to then Russia, and so the Soviet Union had fallen, and actually became an imam and teacher at a masjid there, leading Taraweeh. Right? Alhamdulillah. So we accept outward Islam and we don't doubt it. Of course, not doubting it, as we've seen from Peter saying, does not mean that you don't take caution. You don't take caution. If someone's captured in war, they say, I'm Muslim, you could still, take the precaution so that, you accept that, but you can also take caution. So just in case, it is to the contrary, that you don't shoot yourself in your own foot. And that also applies at other levels. Right? Someone becomes Muslim in our community, you accept them, you embrace them. But someone who's newly Muslim and they want to marry your daughter, okay? There's two separate things here. There's la ifrata wa la tafrid. There's neither excess nor remissness. You accept, you don't question whether they're Muslim. But caution entails that because one thing is to enter into Islam, have they acquired the qualities of deen, the akhlaq and the adab? Have they become firm-footed in the deen? If they have, then you cannot object. Right? But someone just become Muslim for a year and they're like, rah, 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 they want to marry your daughter, and you've raised her well, etc. You don't doubt his Islam. But is there a potential? It takes a while. None of us, who raised Muslim, became religious and practicing bifadlillahi ta'ala in a day. It takes time. Akhlaq and adab take time to acquire. Right? So, but this is the balance of the deen in judging. That no, you cannot question, what if he's only Muslim to marry you? No, we don't doubt that. But there's the idea, man ahsana islamahu. Right? Someone who's made good their Islam. Right? And that's a reasonable concern. And actually, even with someone who enters Islam, you advise them, don't get married right away. Because someone who makes sense to you right away may not be the kind of person you'd want to marry when you've been Muslim for a few years. And I've seen this many times. Someone became Muslim, they're very enthusiastic, they thought no one will marry him, so they married the first person they could find. And then they get, someone enters Islam, very often they enter with a lot of sincerity and a lot of himmah. So they progressed a lot in their Islam. And the person they married were content the way they are, and it causes problems. So that balance has benefits for both sides. No, you don't question anybody's Islam. But at the same time, you let someone grow into Islam, and you have to look at the whole package. Okay? We judge by the outward. This is an important principle here. That don't say about someone who greets you with the salam, you're not a Muslim. We judge by the outward. Innama, as Imam Shafi'i radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, إِنَّمَا نَحْكُمُ بِالظَّاهِرِ وَاللَّهُ يَتَوَلَّى السَّرَائِرِ. We judge only by the outward, and Allah takes care of the inward. We also see the assumption of soundness, that al-aslu fil ashya as-sihha, right? And this applies to our judgment of people, right? That a believer is supposed to be wasi' as-sadr, supposed to have an expansive chest, an expansive heart, right? Such that we have good opinion of all people. We have good opinion of all people. Okay? And we think well of them, and we have good opinion of them. And we take them by their outward profession and accept that. We leave their inward and their motives to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowing, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Hujurat, إِنَّ بَعْضَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ. That much, and here the ba'd can refer to some, a little, can be للتقليل, can also be للتكثير. Here, إن بعض الظن إثم, that some ill opinion is sinful. It means أي أكثر الظن السيء إثم. That most ill opinion is sinful. One, because it's wrong. Number two, you don't have sufficient basis to make that judgment. And it leads to harm. And it's against the command of Allah. And more. Right? So we judge people by that outward. So we have good opinion and goodwill towards them while taking the necessary precaution. But a precaution grounded in good opinion and goodwill, not in ill opinion. So they say that the assumption of soundness with respect to other people, this is your operational certainty. They say al-aslu fil ashya bimanzilati al-yaqeen al-amali. The basis in something, the base assumption in a matter is like your operational certainty. وَالْيَقِينُ الْأَصْلِ لَا يَزُولُ بِالشَّكِّ الطَّارِئِ. And your original certainty is not lifted by occurrence of doubts. بَلْ لَا يَزُولُ الْيَقِينُ إِلَّا بِالْيَقِينِ. Rather, certainty is only lifted by certainty. So when you're sure, you're not a fool. And your next door neighbor, you thought he'd become Muslim, but it was the wrong bill that they were talking about. He said, I'm not Muslim. Say, no, he is Muslim. He's so good. Wallah, he must be Muslim. Okay? No, that's absurd. The guy's saying I'm not Muslim. Say, no, he has to be Muslim. Okay? Okay? So, this assumption of soundness is very important. Right? One of the Indian scholars, he was really frustrated because all these people are saying wacky things. So he said, look, حسن الظن لا يفتقر إلى دليل. says having a good opinion of someone does not require proof. Rather, ill opinion requires proof. Right? It requires sufficient proof. Until you have sufficient proof, you can't have ill opinion. Rather, we know from the Sunnah very clearly that if someone comes to you with bad about another person, what is the Sunnah? That you don't investigate it. Some people say, oh, you know what's going on? You know, he's doing such and such. Okay? And they didn't do it out of nasiha. Okay? Out of nasiha, seeking good for the other person. Out of amr bil ma'roof, about commanding good or forbidding the wrong, or seeking advice. Are you allowed to investigate? No, you're not allowed to investigate, which people do all the time. Oh, guess what? I saw so and so. You know, there's pictures of her at a bar or whatever. So let me go and check. Right? That itself is wrong, because you keep the good opinion, but that can allow you to. You don't leave the good opinion, but can you take caution? If you can do something of benefit, then yes. Right? So let's say someone you could influence. Right? It's your cousin. You grew up together. Someone tells you something about them, even if they did it with a bad reason. They just did it to backbite someone, to slander someone. So you don't change your opinion. If your niyyah is simply to find out, is it true? Is Bilal drinking these days? If that's the intention, you're not allowed to leave your good opinion. Just keep your good opinion and do not investigate. If you think that you can command the good, forbid the wrong, or be of nasiha to them to be able to benefit the person, then you could go and investigate. Okay? This assumption of soundness is very important. Okay? And it's a serious adab of the deen to have satr of people, to conceal the affairs of people. Right? So they say, for example, one of the sort of modern adab is on Facebook. If you see someone is at a wedding, they say it's probably better not to see their pictures, because in Jordan, you know, all kinds of things happen at weddings, right? So you don't want to know if they did some, you know. Sometimes it's better to stay on the, you know, on the good opinion, that then see things that could, you know, make, you know, change your opinion of the person for no good reason. And the Prophet ﷺ was very careful about that. He said, let none of you tell me or bring me any news about my companions that will change my opinion of them, because I hope to meet my Lord thinking nothing but good of my companions. And this is a sunnah, right? And you know, and there's blessings, you know, with alhamdulillah we're able to keep in touch with people, etc. But this is one of the areas where very often we fall into ill opinion. And sometimes, you know, we say, oh look, someone put a picture of one of them. I actually was at that conference. I told them, take that down. They put a picture of one of the shuyukh. He looks like he's standing in a bar. And actually, I was there when this was at a conference. There was a restaurant right in the lobby, and the restaurant had these bottles of wine, whatever, right on display. Because there's like a bar area right in the lobby, and the restaurant went inside. So you could sit outside and just have snacks, or you could go into the. So Shaykh was walking to give his dars, right? His lecture so he's walking by. Someone took a picture of him. But he'd been blocked, so that moment he was standing. So it looked like he was standing in a bar. But it wasn't a bar, it was the lobby of the hotel. Right? So you see something like that. Right? So you have to be very careful. These kinds of things, right, shouldn't cause you to, you know, that assumption of soundness, you know, should not leave you. Rather, doubts, etc., you leave them and you don't investigate. You don't investigate. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He make us of those who confirm and are careful in our judgment. And we also saw in this verse the principled nature of jihad. Right? Jihad is not causing destruction on earth, and then putting up, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah flag after you destroy everything, right? That in the context of the verse, one person was killed by honest error, and revelation came about it. One person. The Prophet ﷺ was shaken. Some people describe that we'd never seen him so shaken. One person. Okay. And there appeared to be good reason. How would someone from Fadak have become Muslim? Okay. He's just doing it to save himself. Okay. So that's one of the areas that one should never hesitate about anything about our deen. Right? That وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً, we have not sent you except as mercy to all creation. Right? And we should learn about jihad likewise, because jihad is one of the expressions of that mercy when upheld, as upheld by the Prophet ﷺ, as upheld by the early generations of Muslims, as upheld throughout much of our history. Right? That it's nothing that we should feel ashamed about. Right? Nothing that we should feel ashamed about. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding of religion and to have clarity about the guidance of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The next call that we're going to look at tomorrow, also from Surah An-Nisa, if you want to read ahead, is verse 135. It's on upholding justice. Upholding justice. Kunu qawwamina bil qist. Stand steadfastly and resolutely in justice. Walau ala shuhada'a lillah, as witnesses for the sake of Allah. Walau ala anfusikum, even if it be against yourselves. Awil walidain, or your own parents. Wal aqrabin, or those close to you. Right? And then the verse continues after a bit. And we'll see the verse tomorrow inshallah about what it means to stand resolutely for justice. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama taslima. Any question before we close? Yes. No, the soundness of thinking. No, it applies. They say in matters of dealings, of worldly dealings, except in the things that are exceptional, like giving salam, for example. The basis is that Muslims and non-Muslims are dealt with in the same way. Right? There may be higher degrees of rights and responsibilities, but for example, the rights of the neighbor, they apply because they're a neighbor, even if, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. Visiting the sick person applies whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. We see it from the example of the Prophet ﷺ. A whole number of things. Someone's sick, the Jewish boy who was dying, while his people were actually plotting against the Muslim, he went and visited him. He wasn't even living close to the Prophet ﷺ. Right? And which is why Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he gave this principle that, with respect to dealing with non-Muslims, that لَهُمْ مَا لَنَا وَعَلَيْهِمْ مَا عَلَيْنَا. That when it comes to dealings, they have the rights that we have, and they have the responsibilities that we have. In matters of transactions and dealings, etc., we have certain things that are exclusive to Muslims, like in general, then giving the salam, etc. Although there's a lot of the early Muslims said that if people become accustomed to giving salams, right, and they're non-Muslim, you can give them the salam as well. You can even initiate it. Right? It's only when it's only given amongst the Muslims that you wouldn't initiate it yourself. And if you look in Kitab al-Salam, for example, of Ibn Abi Shaybah, many of the early Muslims took that opinion. And there's detail about it. So there's some things that are unique to Muslims, there's certain things that are unique to non-Muslims. They can trade in whatever they want to trade in. Right? So those rights are exclusive to them. Travelers used to say, if you're looking for wine, look for where the churches are, because that's where the wine will be sold in a Muslim city. Okay? They're allowed to trade in wine, sell pork, buy and sell using usury, whatever, as long as they don't spread that in the broader Muslim society. They're allowed to. Even more shocking than that, in terms of the rights of a non-Muslim, when the Muslims went to Iraq, they found that some of the sects from, of what we call the Majus, they would allow marriage between a man and his mother, or a man and his sister, mainly for inheritance purposes. Someone dies in the family, you don't want, the mother has all this wealth, you don't want her to go marry a stranger. So how do you save the wealth? Simplest way of saving the wealth? Marry her, right? So they would do this. When it was raised, and the fuqaha mentioned it was raised to Muslim qudat. So what do we do? Said nothing. Sayyidina Umar himself had laid out this principle. Umirna an natrukahum wa ma yadinun. We've been commanded to let them be and what they hold to be true. As long as they don't try to impose it or spread it amongst us. They want to marry, brother and sister. If they ask us our opinion, we'll say we disagree. This is what we believe to be correct. They want to do it. I mean, out of social concern, we tell them that no. But as long as they don't try to impose it on us or spread it, umirna natrukahum. So what do we do? All these people who are getting married to their sisters or their mothers. If they hold it to be true, you let them be. If they bring it to the Muslim judge, you tell them beforehand that this is the ruling in the Sharia. Do you accept that? If you do, then we can go ahead with the case. But even if they bring it to the Muslim court, you tell them, the adab of the qadi there is to tell them what the ruling is first. That this is the ruling that the judge will apply if the proof can be established. Right? So broadly, this idea of having, the Muslims are out to get non-Muslims in a society, that's absolutely not the case. Right? That's absolutely not the case. But when it comes to giving rights, actually, a lot of the fuqaha say you have to be more careful in giving the rights. They said, in terms of grades, in terms of rights, things are opposite from what people imagine. You have to be more careful in giving animals their rights than humans. Because animals will deal with you on the basis of justice. On the day of judgment, there's qisas. Right? The animals will be resurrected, and all their rights will be cleared, and then they'll disappear like dust. Except those animals that someone wanted in Jannah. Right? So there's some animals who are mentioned, they say all the animals mentioned in the Qur'an specifically, all of them are in Jannah. There's other animals. Said if you had a pet animal and you wanted, if you can still remember it, if you wanted your pet in Jannah, لَهُمْ مَا يَشَاءُونَ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. Right? But in general, animals don't go to paradise. Right? But the animals won't forgive you. The asl is that the dealing with the animals is on the basis of justice. So be careful. And there's many, many hadiths about the danger of wronging an animal. They say the most careful you have to be with the rights is with animals. Then with non-Muslims. Because the Muslim could overlook you as a good deed. But if that non-Muslim dies a non-Muslim, then they want anything to lessen their condition in the hereafter. So you have to be even more careful. They say, of course, this is bi'atibar, from one condition, or from one consideration. And then you have the Muslim. The Muslim, inshallah, is in a good state. Even the Muslim, you have to be very careful, because you could bankrupt yourself. Atadruna man al-muflis. Do you know who the bankrupt person is? But they might excuse you. There's that little possibility that they could be. That's why they say the best people to wrong are righteous people, because they'll forgive you, right? To wrong by mistake, yani. Okay? Okay? Other people, you do a little thing with them, they'll remember it 50 years later. So, nasal Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala al-afiyah. So, being excellence in dealing with others applies across the board, right? Now, if someone's at enmity with you, you give them their rights, but you don't go above and beyond that in the ways of social nicety. That's idlal. You're firm with them. But you're firm with them with the excellence entailed by that interaction. Right? There's still a call to excellence in dealing with your enemy, but excellence is what will be ما هو أحسن عند Allah, what will be best in the sight of Allah. So there's an excellence in dealing there as well, which is what action will be best, most pleasing to Allah in that circumstance. Okay? Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala alam. And there's verses also one has to be careful. Some things people misinterpret. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, let them find in you وَلْتَجِدْ فِيكُمْ غِلْظَةً. Right? So people read it and say غِلْظَة, so we should be ghalidh with the, that's not what it means. Right? The غِلْظَة there means that you should be firm, not that you be ghalidh. Right? There's a difference, because, right? And that's one of the dangers. People is إعجاب كل ذي رأي برأيه. People, everyone being impressed by their own opinion. Okay? Yeah, yes, it says ghilza, but what does it mean? What is the tafsir of the early Muslims of that? What do the imams of tafsir say? Okay? That's one of those problems. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala alam.